a child is living in a community where there are significant possibilities of exposure. I think that would be probably the most difficult to account for.
When's the last case of polio in the United States, wild polio?
Oh, I forget the exact year, but it's been probably 20, 25 years.
Would 1979 sound correct to you?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. So that wouldn't be an issue, correct?
No,
Exposure?
polio would not be an issue.
Okay. How many cases of diphtheria have there been in the last 10 years in the United States?
It's very rare or absent.
All right. Less than 5, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Isn't that true for most of the diseases, except for maybe pertussis, right?
Well, pertussis, HIV, hepatitis, those are diseases that are still common.
Okay, so if we excluded...
Mumps, yeah.
Go ahead. Mumps, pertussis. Okay. So since this is retrospective, we would know where those outbreaks are, right? Because they're very carefully tracked by the CDC, correct? Since we know where the outbreaks are for those diseases, that could be, was that a yes?
Yes.
Since we know where those outbreaks are, that could be actually probably pretty easily controlled for as well, correct?
In principle, yes.
Okay, so can you name me a co-founder that would be difficult to control for in the study?
Well, at the moment, I can't think of any other that would be material, although I think one would have to look at genetic issues and the health of other members in the family and so forth. But again, I am not saying that such a study is impossible. I'm just pointing out that it would be a very difficult study to do, and the conclusions that you could draw from the study might be very limited.
Well, when you keep saying it's difficult, but and your reason for that, I understand, is potential co-founders, and I'm just trying to understand what those are. So you've said familial history. Presumably the parents would be in the same health plan as the children, so you'd have the parents' medical history too, correct? So that could be controlled for as well, right?
Yes.
And you said 2 questions ago? That was a yes? Okay. So that could be easily controlled for, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so can you tell me again, can you tell me a co-founder that would actually be difficult to control for in this study?
Well, other than the ones that I've mentioned, and not having thought about doing such a study, that's all I can say.
Okay. If you did such a study, are you aware that advocacy groups and other people interested in this issue have been calling for this exact study of comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated for 30 years already?
I don't spend a lot of time on the web, so I can't say that I know that such a study is being requested.
Okay. Well, but you do read IOM reports and CDC reports. Okay. And you never come across any IOM or CDC reports in which they specifically address the repeated calls for such a study?
No.
Okay. Would it be surprising to you if I told you those existed?
That what existed?
That CDC and IOM reports in which they document the calls for such a study?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, no.
Would you be surprised to know that the CDC, in fact, issued an entire report regarding conducting such a study and the calls for conducting such a study?
And they issued a what, did you say?
I said, would you be surprised to know that the CDC, in fact, issued a report in response to the request for the calls for such a study?
No, I wouldn't be surprised that there was a response, no.
Okay. So, in looking for such a study, isn't it true that there actually has been one such study conducted in the past, for the first time ever, in the last year? Correct?
I'm not aware of that study.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 24. The title of this study is A Pilot Comparative Study of the Health of Vaccinated and Unvaccinated 6 to 12-year-old United States children, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the authors of this study are professors at the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, School of Public Health, Jackson State University, correct?
Just a minute.
That's what it says.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, let's just wait for co-counsel to get a copy.
Sorry about that.
I thought it had gone through. Did you mark these? Okay, so
Ms. Newsma, do you have it?
I shouldn't just, yep.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
are you familiar with this pilot study, Dr. Plotkin?
No.
Okay.
I see it's been published in the Journal of Translational Science, which is not one of the journals I read, and is probably one of those multiple so-called predatory journals that we are trying to deal with currently.
So is anybody in any university that publishes anything that's negative about vaccines predatory, or I forgot the other
No,
adjectives you used earlier
it's
today?
not that. Is that there are journals now that will publish anything for money, and I get about 10 of those invitations a day.
So does money influence judgment,
It may.
conduct? Yeah.
It may. I
Okay.
cannot tell
So-
until I read this study.
I understand. So, well, in this study, if you look, if you take a quick look at it, you'll see that it involves looking at total health outcomes between vaccinated and unvaccinated homeschool children.
Yes.
Okay. When you're ready, please turn to page 5. Do you see the row that says chickenpox?
Yes.
Okay, so the odds ratio for the unvaccinated were twice as likely. No, I'm sorry, 4 times as likely to get chickenpox, right?
Yes.
Yeah, 0.26, so odds ratio about 4. The kids who are unvaccinated were about 4 times more likely to get chickenpox.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is that a yes?
Yes.
And do you see for whooping cough, the unvaccinated children were 3 times as likely to get whooping cough?
Yes.
Yes. Go down to where it says allergic rhinitis. What is
Yes.
that?
Well, it's essentially runny nose because of allergy.
Okay. Do you see that it says that the vaccinated children were 30 times as likely to have allergic rhinitis?
Yes, I see that number.
Do you see that it says that vaccinated children were 3.9 times as likely to have allergies?
Yes,
4.2 times as likely to have ADHD?
yes,
4.2 times as likely to have autism spectrum disorder?
yes.
2.9 times as likely to have eczema?
Mm-hmm.
5.2 times as, sorry. 5.2 times as likely to have learning disability?
Yes,
3.7 times as likely to have neurodevelopment disorder?
yes,
And 2.4 times as likely to have any chronic condition?
yes.
Okay. Wouldn't you like to see a larger scale study that refuted these claims?
It would be ideal, yes. It would certainly be important to repeat the study and to enroll patients in a blinded fashion. I really would have to read this to see exactly how they enrolled the children or the parents in this study.
Doesn't the existence of the study, though, strike that? Okay, so it at least calls for further similar studies, hopefully, to either confirm or disprove the findings in the study, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, I would agree.
Okay. And I'm going to show you one more study that was done with the same data from this author. Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 25. Has it been sent? Okay. This is another study by this is another publication using the same data, I believe, from the same group of professors at the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, School of Public Health, Jackson State University, correct?
It appears that way, yes.
Yeah. Okay, and the title of this one is Preterm Birth, Vaccination, and Neurodevelopmental Disorders, a cross-sectional study of 6 to 12-year-old vaccinated and unvaccinated children, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'll give you a moment to read the abstract. Have you ever seen this study before?
No.
Okay, so just take a moment, please, and read the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So in the middle of the abstract, I'm going to read two sentences, and you can tell me if I've read them correctly. No association was found between preterm birth and NDD in the absence of vaccination. Strike that. Actually, Dr. Plotkin, could you... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down in the abstract. You see where it starts, no association?
Yes.
Can you read that sentence and the next one?
No association was found between preterm birth and NDD in the absence of vaccination, but vaccination was significantly associated with NDD in children born at term, odds ratio 2.7. Is that sufficient?
And the next sentence, please, sir. Thank you.
However, vaccination coupled with preterm birth was associated with increasing odds of NDD, ranging from 5.4 compared to vaccinated but non-preterm children to 14.5 compared to children who were neither preterm nor vaccinated.
Okay. What does NDD stand for?
Neurodevelopmental disorders.
Right. And in this study, it was defined as learning disability, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, and autism spectrum disorder, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But I will also point out
Yes.
that the abstract says there was a convenience sample of 666 children. So clearly it was in no way a randomized study.
Shouldn't we do better studies?
One would have to do a better study if
Larger samples?
larger samples and enrollment, not by convenience.
Right. I believe Dr. Mawson calls these pilot studies, correct? Because nobody else is doing them, so he tried with limited resources, not the resources of pharmaceutical companies and the CDC, to conduct such a study, right?
Well, that's your interpretation. I would have to read the study.
Fair enough. More than fair. Is it possible that his findings in both of these studies could be correct?
Is it possible? Yes, of course. Possibility is always possible.
And hopefully, and ideally, you would conduct a larger or at least additional similar studies to either confirm or dispute the findings in these studies, correct?
Ideally, yes.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. In terms of randomization, if, to make sure I understand the concept, if I, for example, choose to vaccinate based solely on birth dates, would that be randomized?
Yes.
Okay. And that would be considered a randomized study?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked, what is being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 24.
26.
26. Thank you. Sorry. This is the Peter Abe study that you and I were talking about earlier, correct?
This is one of them.
Right. This is the study in which Peter Abe found that children who received DPT in the first 6 months of life versus those who got no vaccines died at 10 times the rate, correct?
Right.
And in this study, you earlier said that your concerns with Abe's prior studies that had similar conclusions was that they weren't randomized. But in this study, it was randomized, correct? Because it was, let me, strike that. In this study, the vaccinated versus unvaccinated children were simply vaccinated or unvaccinated purely by the chance of when their birthday happened to be. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it says they were allocated by birthday. have to, let's see. Well, it's not absolutely clear as to how the randomization was done. Apparently, there were periods of time when they were vaccinating and other periods when they were not vaccinating.
I think that if you have you read the study before, Dr. Plotkin?
I've glanced at it. Yes, I haven't read it thoroughly, but as I said before, this kind of study is useful. There's no doubt about that. But one needs to have some sort of immunological correlate to really confirm that the findings are real. The other point is that Peter is working in an African community where there is a high mortality to begin with, and that's of course because of other factors. And so whether this would be true in, let's say, Denmark or elsewhere is not clear. And if my memory serves, attempts to show in Denmark what Peter has found in Africa have not been positive.
Are you saying that there's a randomized study in Denmark comparing death rates between DPT and T?
It was.
One second.
It was not.
Dr. Plotkin,
Yeah.
hold on a second.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you got to let me, because the court reporter can't take down both of us talking, okay? I'm asking is there a study from Denmark that compared children who received DTP versus children who received no vaccines at all, that was randomized, like this study was, and that compared the death rate between the two groups?
Well, I'd have to go back and look, but my recollection is that because in Denmark everything is registered and they had excellent data on vaccines being given, that they did not find an effect on mortality of giving DTP. But regardless, my point is that mortality in the developed world is relatively rare in childhood, whereas in Africa it's obviously common. But let me repeat what I said about Peter Abbey's work. It's not that I discard it or think that his conclusions are wrong. What I'm saying is that they are observational data and they have to be confirmed by studies of the immune responses, and those have been done only to a certain degree.
When you say studies of immune response, what do you mean?
I mean whether the immunity of the child is interfered with by DTP, that is immunity to other diseases. And as I mentioned before, he has shown that measles vaccine has a positive effect, and that has been confirmed by showing that measles vaccination influences immunity to other diseases.
So what you're saying is that you don't dispute his findings that at least in this African country,
yes,
there is a 10 times greater death rate amongst those who got DPT in the first 6 months of life versus those who got no vaccines, correct?
I don't dispute his findings. I would have to look further to make sure that the populations that were studied were absolutely equal in other respects.
Okay.
But again, I'm not one who discards Peter's studies a priori.
Well, because earlier you told me the issue was it wasn't randomized, but now
That is an important issue.
and
yes.
it is this one is randomized.
Well, again, I just have to be sure that it was randomized, that both groups were vaccinated or non-vaccinated at the same time rather than sequentially.
Yes, because it was done by birthdays. When people came into the clinics, right, depending on their birthday, they either got the vaccine or they didn't, correct? I need the 1994. Oh, you know what? I don't need it. I have it. I'm sorry. Correct?
Well, subject to my reading this carefully, I agree that he is claiming that it's randomized.
So DTaP has been used around the world for what, 30, 40 years now? 50 years?
Mainly since the 1990s,
Okay.
so
Mainly in the
about
1990s.
20 years.
And Peter Abe has been making this claim, a respected scientist whose conclusions you said you take seriously, that DTP might cause more deaths than people it saves.
Yeah.
But let me just finish my question, please. When do you think this extra science on immunology you think is necessary is going to get done? So we know whether or not DTP is saving more children than it kills.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that WHO is looking into it. I don't know that for a fact. But it also has to be pointed out that the vaccine that he's studying is whole cell vaccine. It is not the vaccine being used in the United States.
That's right. But it is being used in most third world countries, correct?
The vaccines being used in the United States are being used in the U.S. and Europe.
The
But
DTP
the
vaccine.
the whole cell vaccine, is used very largely in Latin America and Africa.
In
and
developing
Asia.
countries.
Yes.
Any reason that the life of a child in a developing country is not equal to that in a first world country?
No,
Okay.
but the whole cell vaccine is considerably cheaper.
Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 24.
27.
27? What is that? What does it say on there?
27.
27. Sorry. Looked like a 4 to me. Got that? Okay. This is an excerpt from the 1994 IOM report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Under risk modifying factors, okay, the first sentence there says the committee was able to identify little information pertaining to why some individuals react adversely to vaccines when most do not.
Yes.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And handing you what's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 28. I'm going to read you an excerpt from this, and I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Okay. It says, both epidemiologic and mechanistic research suggests that most individuals who experience an adverse reaction to vaccines have a pre-existing susceptibility. These predispositions can exist for a number of reasons. Genetic variations in human or microbiome DNA, environmental exposures, behaviors, intervening illness, or developmental stage, to name just a few, all of which can interact as suggested graphically in Figure 3-1. Some of these adverse reactions are specific to the particular vaccine, while others may not be. Some of these predispositions may be detectable prior to the administration of vaccines. And then skipping down a little, much work remains to be done to elucidate and develop strategies to document the immunologic mechanisms that lead to adverse effects in individual patients. Do you disagree with what the IOM wrote here?
Well, not in principle. If such factors can be identified, so far it has been very difficult to identify so-called predispositions.
Isn't that because, Dr. Plotkin, the science is just not being done to make those identify?
Well, some attempts have been made. There's a whole literature by Dr. Poland at the Mayo Clinic on such, but the things that he's studied have been relatively minor reactions.
Are you aware of any serious large-scale studies that have been done to assess the predispositions that might result in an adverse reaction from a vaccine?
There have been some genetic studies done.
By who?
As I said, by the Mayo Group in particular, and also some studies done at Vanderbilt.
Okay, who did the studies at Vanderbilt?
Well, James Crow was one of the authors.
Okay, and what did the studies involve?
The studies involved looking at certain enzymes, particularly, to see if there was an association with, let's see, it was with, I'm trying to remember which vaccine it was based on. Smallpox vaccine.
Smallpox. Do people routinely get smallpox vaccine anymore in America?
No.
Okay. Other than the researcher at Vanderbilt and the one at the Mayo Clinic that you mentioned, is there anybody else that you know of that is conducting any serious science to identify what would render a child susceptible to a vaccine injury?
No, I think the people of British Columbia are doing some work.
Who's that?
Can't remember the guy's name.
Is it Chris Shaw?
Sorry?
Is his name Chris Shaw?
Could be. It's a whole group of people at British Columbia.
And they've published good science in this area?
Yes.
Respectable science.
Yes.
And they are the ones who've looked at aluminum adjuvants injected into lab animals in particular, correct?
They have done some work with aluminum adjuvants, yes.
Right. Showing that injecting aluminum can go to different parts of the animal, right?
Yes.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same group of scientists.
Mm-hmm.
At the University of British Columbia. So so do you recall if it's Chris Shaw? And his group
I don't recall specifically.
is okay, but it's the group at the University of British Columbia that's looking in particular at aluminum adjuvants in vaccines, correct?
Well,
In animal models.
they're looking at a lot of different things, including adjuvants.
Okay. Understood. Okay. And other than the group at British Columbia, Mayo Clinic, and Vanderbilt, are you aware of anybody else doing such science?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. If anybody would know, it would be you, right, Dr. Plotkin?
Well, I cannot read every published scientific paper.
Right on. Okay. Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to refer to the various forms of aluminum adjuvant.
I'm sorry?
To various forms of aluminum adjuvant used in vaccines as alum. Is that okay?
Yes,
Because there are different kinds, correct?
yes.
Okay. What is an antigen?
An antigen is usually a protein that induces an immune response.
Antigens in killed vaccines, though, produce a very weak immune response, hence the need to add alum to the vaccine formulation, correct?
Frequently, not always.
Okay. And alum, injected alum can increase the production of all kinds of cytokines, including IL-1, IL-2, IL-6, IL-17, correct?
Yes,
Okay. Alum can be recovered from the injection site months or years after intramuscular injections, correct?
well, it's possible to find alum. Of course, aluminum is a frequent, what shall I say, is present in all of us. We ingest a lot of it.
I'm actually talking about injected aluminum. I'm asking, can it be recovered from the injection site months or years after intramuscular injection?
I believe it's possible, yes.
Okay. Okay. If I want to read in your book that you're holding in front of you, do you know if it says, quote, "It is established that aluminum salt can be recovered at the injection site months or years after intramuscular injections"?
Well, I'd have to look at it, but I don't doubt that that could be in the book, yes.
Okay. An antigen that is absorbed by alum can be taken up by macrophages and dendritic cells.
I'm
Yes,
sorry. I need to...
No problem. Antigen that is absorbed by alum are taken up by macrophages and dendritic cells. Correct. Macrophages is MACROPHAGES. Macrophages are immune cells, correct?
well, they are scavengers, basically.
And what do?
They take up antigens and present them to other cells.
So that means that the alum, as well as the antigen that's bound to it, are taken up by macrophages and dendritic cells, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Aluminum injected into the brain, into the body, can travel to the brain, correct?
I don't know that for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised.
You've never seen any studies that show that aluminum injected into the body can travel to the brain?
I have not seen such studies, no. Or not read such studies.
I'm going to hand you what's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 29. Please take a look at that. Did you send it? Okay, in this study, do you have a problem with the journal that this study was published in?
No.
Is the name of the journal Vaccine?
Yes.
Are you a editor in that journal?
I was at one point.
And you consider that be a prestigious journal?
Yes.
Okay. So in this study, they found that injecting rabbits with aluminum, and then they dissected them, they found aluminum in the brain of the rabbits, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does that change your opinion of whether injecting aluminum can travel to the brain?
Well, it shows experimentally that that's the case. I'd have to look at the concentrations that were injected,
Okay.
whether they were reasonable with respect to what's injected into humans.
Here's another study. Here's another study that's being marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 30. In this study involved mice. Can you please take a look at it? And that study's from 2009, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
Ms. Newsma, did number 30 go through for you?
Yes.
okay.
I'll let you know if I have anything.
And that study found that injecting aluminum in mice caused motor deficits and motor neuron degeneration, correct?
Apparently, yes. But again, one has to compare the amounts injected with what amounts are injected with vaccines.
So in this study, the authors note that they were attempting to use dose equivalent amounts of alum vis-a-vis the vaccination schedule. I'll pose that as a question, but I'll leave it to you to take, you obviously, it sounds like you've never read this study, so you could take your time. Okay. And Dr. Plotkin. Stop marking these. Start sending them to her. Okay, Dr. Plotkin, there's no question pending about that study anymore. So let's move on.
Okay.
Okay. Are you familiar with a study entitled Delivery of Nanoparticles to Brain Metastases of Breast Cancer Using a Cellular Trojan Horse? from the Indiana University School of Medicine and Rice University?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with a study from 2013 entitled Slow CCL2 Dependent Translocation of Biopersistent Particles from Muscle to Brain?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with the after this deposition, I'm happy to provide you copies of all these studies. You can take an opportunity to look at them. Are you familiar with a 2015 study entitled Highly... actually, you know what? Before we continue, I'm going to mark this one. The study I just spoke about, I'm going to mark as Plaintiff's Exhibit 32. I'm going to hand this to you. Yeah, I'll give that to you in a second. In this study, if you turn to page 5, you can actually see pictures of the brain of dissected mice injected with aluminum and pictures of the aluminum in the brain. Let me know when you've had an opportunity to look at that.
Yes, okay.
Okay. That's from 2013. I'm going to show you another study from 2015. I'm being marked a Plaintiff's Exhibit number 33. Okay. This study involved 155 mice, again injected with aluminum, and again you can find pictures of the aluminum in the dissected mice in their brains. Since we're running short on time, I won't hand you all the studies on this. But having had an opportunity just for the last few minutes to look at a few of these studies, do you have any? Can aluminum injected into the body travel to the brain?
Well, there are experiments suggesting that is possible.
Okay.
In particular, I know there's a French group that's been, let's say, working on the potential dangers of aluminum, as well as the British Columbia group. What we lack is evidence in humans that such phenomena are causing the problems that are being caused in mice, and that may relate to dose issues.
Yeah. Isn't that because those studies would be unethical, Dr. Plotkin?
No, I wouldn't say they'd be unethical. I would say that looking for aluminum deposits in the brains of people at autopsy, etc., that's entirely feasible.
And so if they did autopsies of people's brains and they found aluminum, then that would be a cause for concern?
It could be, but one would need to combine that or look at the symptoms of the patients whose brains are being examined.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to hand you one final study on this. It's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 34. This one, they were very careful, my understanding, is to give to do a number of different dose responses, different doses to see the response.
Oh, yeah, this is the French group.
That study is the French group, right? That I think you were referring to earlier?
Yes.
Okay. So, in any event, if aluminum bound to antigen does travel to the brain, Dr. Plotkin, and remains there, would that cause an immune activation event in the brain?
I don't know whether it would or not.
Okay. Do you think it could result in neurodevelopmental disorders?
Again, there's no evidence that that's the case.
I'm going to hand you what's being marked. Yeah. Okay. Being handed you what's marked Exhibit 35. Are you familiar with, let me know. Go ahead. Oh, shoot. That's 104. Familiar with this book?
No.
Okay, well then, I'll give you a copy today when you leave. Okay.
Ms. Newsman, Exhibit 35 is uploading, but it might take just 1 second.
Dr. Plotkin, has an increase in IL-6 been shown to induce autism-like features in lab animals?
Well, IL-6 is an inflammatory cytokine, and its relationship to autism, I would say, is not clear, but it is an important cytokine.
Has it been shown to induce autism-like features in animals when injected into animals for experimentation?
I'm not aware of that, but that could happen if you use enough IL-6.
Do you know the maximum amount? Strike that. No, I don't have time to do the marking. Are you familiar with the study out of? Are you familiar with the study entitled "Inhibition of IL-6 trans signaling in the brain increases social ability in the BTBR mouse model of autism"?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar with the study called "Maternal Immune Activation Alters Fetal Brain Development Through Interleukin 6"?
Vaguely, yes. Yeah.
Published in the Journal of Neuroscience?
Yeah, well, I don't remember the journal.
Is that one of the journals you consider respectable?
Yes.
Okay. And this was out of the University of California Medical Center. This is from California Institute of Caltech. That institution did a number of studies regarding immune activation and its effects, right? Respected group.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Sorry, that group did a number of studies related to immune activation and neurological disorder, correct?
Yes.
And they found a connection between immune activation and neurological disorders, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And one of the, is that a yes? Okay. And one of the studies findings they had was that immune activation alters fetal brain development through interleukin 6, correct?
As I said before, IL-6 is an important cytokine. I would point out in relation to immune activation that immune activation occurs as a result of disease and exposure to a variety of stimuli, not just vaccines.
But it can be caused by vaccines, correct?
Immune activation is the objective of vaccines.
Do you know the maximum amount of aluminum that is injected into a child who follows the CDC schedule?
I haven't done the arithmetic, but I believe it would amount to several milligrams.
Mark these. Mark these two. I'll mark this one. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 36. Okay? And before I do that, question for you. The group out of the British Columbia that you were... the group out of the University of British Columbia, that's out of the Department of Ophthalmology and Visual Sciences?
Yeah.
All right. And, okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to hand you a letter from what's been marked as Exhibit 36, which is a letter from one of the professors that runs the lab in that group.
We have 4 minutes left on the disc.
Okay. Have you seen this letter before?
No.
Okay. This letter is from the group at the University of British Columbia you mentioned before, correct?
Yes.
And it's addressed to HHS, correct?
Yes.
As well as NIH,
Yes.
FDA, and CDC, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In the first paragraph, can you read the first paragraph?
I am writing to you in regard to aluminum adjuvants in vaccines. The subject of one is one my laboratory works on intensively, and therefore where I feel I have some expertise. In particular, we have studied the impact of aluminum adjuvants in animal models of neurological disease, including autism spectrum disorder. Our relevant studies on the general topic of aluminum neurotoxicity in general, and specifically in regard to adjuvants, are cited below.
Now, can you read the last sentence in the next paragraph?
In children, there is growing evidence that aluminum adjuvants may disrupt developmental processes in the central nervous system and therefore contribute to ASD in susceptible children.
And just the next paragraph.
Despite the foregoing, the safety of aluminum adjuvants in vaccines has not been properly studied in humans, even though pursuant to the recommended vaccine schedule published by the Centers for Disease Control, a baby may be injected with up to 3.675 micrograms of aluminum adjuvant by 6 months of age.
And just the next sentence, I guess we can wrap up.
In regards to the above, it is my belief that the CDC's claim on its website that vaccines do not cause autism is wholly unsupported. So my comments are, one, that my estimate was pretty much correct. Second, that unfortunately Dr. Shaw has been associated with the party that I mentioned before, Tomla Yanovich, who in my view is completely untrustworthy as far as scientific data are concerned. So I'm concerned about Dr. Shaw being influenced by that individual. And I'm not aware that there is evidence that aluminum disrupts developmental processes in susceptible children.
Dr. Shaw is a scientist that studies aluminum regularly, correct?
Yes.
Do you study aluminum regularly?
No.
Okay. We done?
Yeah. Okay. This ends tape 4 of the deposition of Dr. Stanley Plotkin. We are going off the record. The time is